Okay, hello everyone, welcome to stage 4 of the Dirt Racing series. We're in zone 2 again with the B pluses. This is the TTT this week, Team Time Trial. I've just got the course just up for you, so you should be able to see it in the top corner, top left of the screen. So as you can see with the course, we start out going through the deserts, nice and flat, about 7 kilometers on the deserts. We have a little kick as you come out of it. Then we go downhill for a little bit, coming through little flatter section, coming into the town again as we go through the underwater tunnels, up through the town into the S's, round the volcano, back through the S's, then on the long downhill through the fishing village before climbing back up into the desert at the finish. So quite a technical course, but generally very flat. The little punches that you regularly get, especially coming in and out of the S's and going through them, really do tire people when you're close to your limit. And I have a couple of dirt sections where I'd like to see teams pushing up a little bit, treating them as they are, which is essentially small climbs because of the difference in rolling efficiency with different wheels. So it'll be interesting to see how teams deal with that as we go, and whether the Goosters, who are currently in first, can maintain their lead. We're starting off in league order, so starting with the Goosters in first. Just put it on your screen so you can see. TBR Dirty Bags in second, start delay of 1.5 minutes. They'll be chasing them down 30 seconds apart, and the riders will be able to probably see the team directly behind them, maybe the one behind that as they go. BZR in third, Valhalla in fourth, Eagle Fang, another dirt team, fifth, KC in sixth, ESRT seventh, Cobra Kai in eighth, and then carry on through. As you see, I'll just show you the league structure, so you should be able to see how it follows that on the screen at the moment. So currently there's only a 2-point gap, which is 2 places between the Goosters and TBR, and the 3-point back to BZR. It gets tight with BZR and Valhalla for third. Then we've got a bit of a jump back to a couple of other teams. But as we've seen in the list racing series, a lot of teams come first one week and then come far lower down. There's lots of big swings week in, week out because of the variety of racing, the different types of racing, the different courses, so it makes it very interesting. Big turnarounds do and have been happening. It'll be interesting to see who does this. We've had the ITT so far in stage 1, but it'll be interesting on Team Time Trial how the teams get on and if it's differing. In terms of number of riders, teams are allowed 8 riders, well, up to 8 riders to take part in it. Lots of the teams will be running with less just because of sign-ups and availability, which is very understandable. Although it might be more interesting if we did reduce that limit, but we'll see going forward. It's the 4th rider over the line for teams with more than 4 riders. For those with less, it's the last rider for everyone who rides unless there's a technical issue. So it's very much a team-based effort, and teams with fewer riders are going to struggle a lot on this. It does make a big difference having extra riders, even if they're just sat in the draft, not necessarily pushing at the front. It just gives you a bit more room and comfort and makes things more smooth in the pack itself. And that's the aim of the game today. Just keeping things nice and smooth in the pack through these sections, not doing too much work, getting the recovery while you can, then pushing on the front. Okay. We'll just have a quick look at the sign-ups. Generally it's very similar to previous weeks. So as you can see, Swanee's back after having a week off last week. He'll be riding, I believe, for Eagle Fang, and team who are in 5th. He's got a far big sum, so sorted by 20-minute power. Because it's generally on the flat courses, while Watts per kilo is important, because we've got fixed cap here, actually having more raw power is a benefit. They can do less work in the draft, and they're not putting out as big a percentage when they're pulling at the front for the same speeds. So it is a significant advantage to being heavier. Second strongest rider, also above 400 watts for 20 minutes, is Stuart Forbes. The Dirty Box, who are a bit lower down the table, I believe around 10th. So, and then we've got Clem, 5th from the Goosters. Andre Fugner in for the Goosters as well. Snowy Pruitt, who's with the Box as well. So the Box might be a team who could look to move up several places here with a strong turnout. We've got someone from Watt Fabric in 3rd, Carsten, and John Blackshaw for TBR. We've got another TBR man, Jewel, who's a heavy rider as well, very strong rider. There's a significant drop off in the number of watts when we get lower down. So we're going to see how teams get on, especially if they're 1 or 2 really strong riders, how they utilise them best. we'll just get back. So we've got a 1 minute delay till the team starts, so we should see the Goosters coming off soon. You can see they're just moving through the field now. See if we can jump on with them. There we go. So we're just going to go through some of the teams, see how they're doing, see what the gaps look like while they're racing. And that's how we'll treat it today. It's going to be not too easy to tell exactly who's in head, but because we've set off in league order, we'd like to see that, you know, the teams starting high up are probably going to be the ones finishing high up, so you can see the gaps appearing between them. So as we set off, they're not going out too quickly. One thing that I do like to see with TTT teams is they push up very hard at the start. You can see TBR just behind them heading out at 6+ watts per kilo. So, I mean, they've settled quite early. But we'd like to see them pushing a bit harder than that to start with. Get the speed up to the mid-40s, which is what they're probably going to target for the race. And then starting to kind of settle into their rhythm. You see, if you look on the right-hand side, you should be able to see the 30-second gap with TBR. So it started off at exactly 30, which is good to see both teams going pretty much spot on time. And we'll see that gap change, and that's how we can tell roughly what positions teams are in for this section. So looking at the front, Clem's leading out on the first pulls. You can see some riders change their first name on Zwift to the number in the pull order they are. So we've got Clem in first, Paul taking over and he's in second, Andre in third, etc. It just helps make things organised and easier to call out if anything goes wrong. You know whose wheel you should be following, you know what you should be doing. So most of the teams will be doing around 30-second pulls. Some of the stronger riders might go a bit longer, doing a minute, sometimes even more. But generally a lot of teams will favour 30-second pulls on the front and just rotating through their riders. You can see BZR have already made up a 3-second advantage over TBR, and it'll be 3 seconds over the Dirt Gooses as well, by pushing out hard from the start presumably. When we come into the desert, it is a 1% section to begin with up until around the point here, so there is time to be gained, especially if you can get up to speed quickly and keep working hard over it. Lots of teams settle in a little bit too early in this and don't quite take into account the big difference, because if you think when you're starting off, you're essentially going from nothing up to full speed, and your time is as soon as you set off. So the quicker you can get up to speed, the quicker you can accelerate, and the quicker you can actually get to your aim, you know, race pace, and massive advantage you'll start to gain from it. One thing to note is there are some weird time fluctuations that do happen on this sidebar. You can see the time gaps just going all over the place at the moment with TBR and BZR, so you can't always fully rely on them, because if you look at them now, currently they're in the same position, and yet we know very clearly they're not. So let's hope that kind of settles down and makes it a bit easier for us to find the gaps. So it looks like Goosters have taken a 2-3 second advantage already out of TBR. So one thing to be cautious of this introduction, it's very flat, and it's easy to kind of overexert yourself here. Some teams will have this a target pull wattage, some go with watts per kilo, and some will go with speed. And it's very easily, if 1 or 2 people just go a bit above, say 10 watts above on your pull, that means everyone in the pack's going to be doing an extra 7 watts. And if that's your kind of, if you think an extra 7 watts for your average pace at the end, that's really significant, and it can take you over from something that's sustainable on the edge of your category to being comfortably in the category above, especially for lighter riders. And it can be a huge impact, so it really is important when people have a plan that they stick to it and people don't pull harder. While, you know, people think it's in their benefit, oh, let's go a little bit harder, we're going to make some speed up, we're going to catch. What it generally does is actually just weakens the team, because you've got, say you have a team of 8, 7 other riders are having to do 7 watts extra to keep up with you for what's going to be 30 seconds of slightly quicker. Whereas instead, if everyone goes up by, say, 1 watt on their pulls, I know it sounds very insignificant, but that's going to be a far less percentage shared, and the actual pace of the entire group will go up, and that's what's important. Generally, you want to aim for everyone to be pulling at the same pace in terms of kilometers an hour. Otherwise, some people will be doing drastically, you know, pace will fluctuate, and it's much harder to change pace than it is just to maintain it. So you see, when you're coming through the front, whoever takes over, once they're sat in the draft, they'll do a little bit more than that front rider, and as they come through, they'll go a bit quicker, and then they'll settle down onto their pace. And so that change, if you then have to push it back up, it's going to take a bit more effort. Or if, say, one rider's going slower than you, and you have to significantly increase your pace, you have to go above what your target pull numbers are. and then settle down, and it just tires you far more. Whereas this is all about just being smooth. It's really nice to see the gooses there for a few seconds, all of them doing around 3.3 in the pack. There are a couple of spikes above 4, but generally 3.3 is probably a good aim for the kind of Cat B Frappe team. For those who aren't aware, WTRL on Thursdays runs a very large team time trial event, and we have different, they call them coffee classes, which is the classes you enter. And unlike most events on Zwift, they're mixed category. So the top class Doppio allows you to have anyone from any category. The next one down is Espresso, which allows you to have 3 A+ riders, and then the rest have to be below A+. Then we go down one more to Frappe, which is 3 A riders, and everyone else has to be B or below. Then we have, oh gosh, Latte, which is 3 B riders, and then everyone else has to be Cat C or below. And then finally Mocha, which is 3 Cat Cs, and then everyone else in D or below. And then we have the Vienna classes, which is the women's version of the same classes. Although you'll find that a lot of the women's teams are actually very competitive on the men's side, which is great to see. And a lot of them, they're very, very valued, especially lighter riders, because they can go over the cap boundary. So if there's TTT courses with a climb, some tactics generally involve just saving one lighter rider who can keep up with those other 3 riders, because it's first 4 over the line. So you always need to have one of the people in the lower category get over the line with the others. So you can't just have your 3 higher cat riders just push away and really dominate. So it's really good to see the different tactics that emerge, especially on climbing courses. As you saw the World Champs a few months ago, it was on London, where there was about an 8-minute climb, something like that, at the end of a flatter section in London. And so it's a real interesting balance, see the different tactics by teams, with some going really, really hard on the intro and then just trying to limp over the climb together as a team. Some conserving one rider, 1 or 2 riders to go over with the 3 from the cat above. And some kind of trying to get all over, being conservative, then pushing a bit harder on the climb, but trying to get everyone over. And you got a real variety of results, especially depending on the classes. And that's a big part of TTTs. So the different classes, there's a different kind of advantage on the climbs versus the flats. So the slower you generally are as a coffee class, so if we're talking about mochas, lattes, anyway, same for things like bike swaps, but the slower the bike class, the more advantage you can gain on things like climbs. So actually the slower you want to pace the flatter sections, because up the climb you drop to a much, much slower speeds. Similarly, so we've been looking at Espressos and Doppio teams. Actually being really quick on the flats is what's important, because, well, obviously you still have to be quick on the climbs, but the climbs have less of a significant advantage. So what we saw with the winners of the different coffee classes is that the changeover happened in Latte to Frappe. Frappe and above, the winners in the World Championships, were all teams who tried to get everyone over practically, apart from Doppio, which is a bit of a different one, because there's essentially unlimited riders. There is no cap on the quality and the level. So actually you just take your strongest riders over. But in Espresso and Frappe, we found that, you know, teams who tried to get as many riders over as possible did better than those who try and save specifically 4 or 5 riders to attack the climb as hard as possible. Whereas in Latte and Mocha, the teams that saved 1 or 2 riders, especially who are under the 50 kilo, it's not, I think it's a bit over 50 kilos, but essentially under the wattage threshold, meaning they have a higher watts per kilo than the normal cat limits, were the winners. So it's nice seeing a different variation. That changes course to course. As you see, Goose is doing very well here, nice and smooth throughout. Generally trying to keep a bit of a bunch. What we like to see ideally is a bit of a more stretched out, especially at the front. You see 1, 2, 3. So you have different percentages of the wattage you need to put out. This is about when we're talking on the flats, depending on what position you're in. So I can probably get the numbers up, but I think it's rough. Let's get it up. Essentially, to do pace. So when you're in second wheel, you hold about 23%. Well, you used to hold 23% less wattage to maintain second wheel. It's now actually changed, so it's closer to around 18%. Third wheel used to be 30%. It's now more like 25% of the wattage of the first rider, the lead rider. And then everyone from 4th on back is the same, which is now around 30% in the new draft dynamics, whereas it previously was around 35%. So it's quite interesting the changes you find with different draft dynamics, and when they update that on Zwift. So yeah, at the moment, those below 4th wheel or further back can all do around 70% of the lead rider wattage. So that's why we have this system where you have one lead rider and take it in turns to pull, etc. But the second wheel and third wheel, it's important to have those as clearly defined people, because if you have 2 or 3 people there, then they're doing, you know, an extra 5 or extra 10% work they need to do if they're a bit further back. In the older power dynamics, you see pace lines a lot more, where it's just a single stretched out line, because we had a thing called sticky draft, where when you got to the rider in the front and you just sit in their draft, you'd feel quite locked in, and actually you'd have to slow down significantly or speed up significantly to leave that position of being just behind them, whereas now they've largely removed that, so you can transition a lot better through rides ahead of you and going backwards behind. So actually it's a bit better now. We think people test out every week, we try different things. We think it's a bit better just to have a clear 1, 2, 3 structure at the front and then a little bunch behind, keeping it tight. You can stretch out, but it's a bit more risk and it's not necessarily going to provide you with a huge amount of benefit. And that's what we can see the Goosters seemingly to do here. They're not the most organised with that, but they do have a clear 1, 2, 3 most of the time. I'll take a look at, they've currently got a 7-second lead over TBR. So let's come back and have a quick look at TBR. And interesting, you can see TBR is 6 seconds down on BZR. So that means the Goosters are roughly 1 second ahead of the Belgian Zwift riders overall at this stage. So you see here TBR in quite a straight pace line. There are a couple of doubling ups happening, but generally it's quite a clear line and riders are trying to stay in order. And you see Sam Atkinson, one of the top riders we've had so far, doing really well last week on the front. It's a bit strange to see. I think he just took a pull, so once he's finished his pull he'll just drop off the power, sink back a bit, and then when he gets towards the back of the pack, you used to have to really push hard. Now you can kind of just slide back a bit more, whereas it used to be a thing of you finish your pull, you drop the watts massively so no one got caught in your draft, and then you push on and catch back on, whereas now you can slide back a bit more. And you'll see with some of the better teams, the more practiced teams, that as they're sliding back, they're trying to fill the gap. So if there's any large gaps, they'll just slide into the gap and stick there, making sure everyone in front of them and behind them is benefit from the draft of the lead rider. So one of the big causes that you see when people leave those gaps or open them up, whether they're sinking back and people haven't quite expected it, or you don't have the person who's sitting in second wheel ready when the lead rider pushes hard all of a sudden, well, the new lead rider. And that's one of the causes for gaps opening up. Early on, generally teams will try and keep all their riders together. So you can see with TBR, they've got all 8 riders. And if something happens early on, it's quite often beneficial, especially if it's on the stronger riders, just to slow down, let them catch back on. But as we come to the kind of sharper end of things, especially as we're going through the S's and these harder sections, see that teams will start to lose riders. At a certain point, it's better just to keep the group pace high. And if a rider's not going to be able to hold on, and they're not going to be able to take pulls, lots of teams will just essentially sacrifice them, ask them to do a hero pull, maybe they do a 10-second all-out effort on the front, and then just drop off totally. And often if there is a gap that opens up, they just don't have the energy or the effort to go above their threshold to catch back on, and above essentially what the lead rider is doing to ensure they catch back on. So as we're coming into the little climb out of the desert, it's very draftable up here, and it's quite interesting to see what some teams do. Lots just treat this as a flat section because the speeds aren't drastically different, but you'd like to see most teams kind of bunching up a little bit more here and treating it as a more watt per kilo effort, rather than, say, having prescribed watts or speed at the front. So you see the top frappe teams will normally try and climb something like this around 5.5 to 6 watts per kilo. You can see here we've got about 5.5, and the leader's currently doing 6.8, 6.5, which is a very strong effort. And they're managing to hold on to his wheel, which is good, so they are getting quite a bit of draft. And as we come over the top, we go into a little downhill, so we'll have to be very careful with the riders at the back. They don't get caught out, they don't open up too much of a gap, because as soon as you hit the downhill in a group, that can be a massive, massive issue if someone's off the back, because you'll have to slow down really significantly and that'll hurt you. So as you see here, we've got a bit of a gap opening up. It's not ideal. You'd like to see those 2 lead riders just paying a little bit more attention. As you can see at the bottom of the screen, you can see the numbers behind, so you can see if you've opened up a gap, and it's one of the things you should really be paying attention to throughout TTTs. Some people tend to have 2 cameras on them, so they'll have they'll have just a preset button where they'll kind of go, they'll change between the rear view, where they're looking directly behind their rider, or necessarily an overhead view. Some will actually have 2 instances of Zwift running, one showing a permanent camera behind them and one showing in front, so they can see very clearly, you know, what the gaps around them are, and they can work on filling that. See, the group there were quite capable of just pushing up, catching back on, which is good to see. And it shows that, you know, they're still strong. They haven't really burnt themselves out so far. Maybe they took the intro a little bit steadier, so they can push on through the steeper, more technical sections that we're coming into. Just see how BZR are getting on. Apologies. So again, BZR having all 8 riders taking full advantage of this, which is, you know, it will make a difference. Teams with only 6 riders, if you're doing 30-second intervals evenly across the board, that's a minute like less rest you're going to get, and that does start to really add up. In other competitions, sometimes you have TTTs with 6 riders, and you know it's a real sizable difference when you have 6 riders all of the same category versus having 8 riders, 3 who can probably pull longer from the category above, and the speeds are just vastly different usually, and you can really tell the difference in the rest and how hard the efforts are. Especially as quite often teams will have technicals, something will go wrong for some rider. For those who watched my earlier stream, we had 2 riders having technicals. One dropped, I believe it was his towel, into his chain, which knocked him out of it totally, and another, I'm not sure quite what happened, but dropped out very close to the line, which could have potentially cost our team a lot of time, and it's happened. You've got to be prepared for it, and you've got to make sure you're ready, and you don't panic when something goes wrong like that. So it's important if you can have all 8, that, you know, if something goes wrong, 2 or 3 riders drop, you're still fine, and you'll still have enough riders with enough energy to cope. But when you're down to a team of 6 and you lose a rider or 2, it can be absolutely horrific. You might be doing 30 seconds on, 1 minute 30 off, and if someone then is too tired, you know, you go down to 30 seconds on, 1 minute off, and it's just absolutely brutal. I have very bad memories of some of the flatter, short France courses, where we were down to 2 or 3 riders pulling for the last 5-10k, and it's just absolutely brutal, especially when you can see other teams around you on the sidebar catching up to you, and you just can't do anything more. You're already on your limit. So BZR have taken about 17 seconds over Valhalla behind them. See, I think Valhalla didn't quite have a full team, did they? Have they got 7? They might have 8. No, so they have 7 riders, which again is definitely impacting them. So to keep close already through that flat section is great, especially with only 7 riders and a couple of lighter weight ones, which does make a difference. You see, as we come over the boardwalk here, and then we go into a little dirt section, I'd like to see riders just punch up a little bit. So currently they're sat at 49, 48 kph, and as they hit this dirt section, they're going to slow down drastically. See, down to 43, 42, 41, and then back on the roads, you want to punch again, get that speed back up. And you see, they're not quite doing that. They'll find that if they did that, they'd get a bit more benefit. Like, the quicker you can deal with these changes and the higher speed you can maintain through these changes and through little inclines like we're going ahead here, the better you'll do, especially when it comes down to a couple of seconds either way. And that's one thing that's quite interesting with this course. There are a lot of technical little sections like that. You know, that didn't seem like much. To most people, oh, it's pretty much entirely flat through that. But against the top teams, Valhalla here would have probably lost 4 seconds, 3-4 seconds, over some of the top teams that have been doing 6 watts per kilo through that dirt section and then a little punch up. Tip is when you see here, they were at 60 kph on the downhill, and so they want to maintain the momentum a bit more. Currently, they're very bunched up at the front. You do see a lot of cycling, which is good. You want to see riders regularly coming through the front, because some will be going quicker, they'll hit the draft, they'll drop speed, hit the draft again. But for a moment there was no one really pulling above 4 watts per kilo. When you have that essentially free speed from the downhill, you want to try and maintain it for a bit longer, because you can say do 5 watts per kilo, and you'll be maintaining 55 kph for significantly longer. Or if you're doing 4, you'll drop straight down to 45, 46, 47 here. And, you know, again, that adds up to a second, 2 seconds straight away. And it's those little bits that you're constantly losing time on. You'll see the top teams just constantly gain time. So dropping back to Eagle Fang, another dirt team. They've got 6 riders at the moment. Presume they'll have started with 6. Oops, apologies. And they've lost time on Valhalla, which means they've probably lost time on... Well, they have lost time on all those lead groups so far. What's interesting, if you see KC just behind them, they're riding with 4 riders, and they've already taken 8 seconds out of Eagle Fang. So it'll be quite concerning for the Eagle Fang team that they're losing time to a team of 4. But I have seen a lot of KC teams entering with lower numbers to some events like this, and doing very well, and in team time trials I've seen them regularly turn up with 6 or so, and absolutely wipe the field, because they tend to be very organised. Those who don't know, Magnus Buchsein was a former B, now racing in A. Is an absolute incredible DS. He has a lot of YouTube videos, and if you want to watch a TTT team run masterfully, he is some person I would absolutely 100% recommend watching. He normally manages them while riding, and if you look at some of the older videos, maybe a year ago, especially when they're a Frappe team, I think they still are like that now in Espresso, but I haven't seen it of late. They used to absolutely dominate week in, week out, and they were so organised in a pace line. Every rider would have their position, there wouldn't be any swapping between positions. A rider would drop off the front, the next person's instantly pulling, the next rider would drop again straight to the back, and they just stay in that order almost perfectly the entire way. But it does take a lot of managing, and they were exceptional at it. See, now they're in a perfect pace line. The little gap to Michael here at the back is probably just a bit big, see at 9 metres. So see, he's having to go up to about 4 watts per kilo, and he's not really closing that gap, so he's going to have to put in a bit of a dig. You see their radix drop back a bit, and that's probably going to fill it a little bit. But again, he needs to just do a little bit more work. My advice generally is just to kick at that point, kick about 6 watts per kilo, jump on early, and then you can settle again. Whereas lots of people try to ease their way back, and it's so hard to judge that. And you can end up doing just below what you need to for, 2-3 minutes, not make any of the gap up, and you're absolutely burnt out. Whereas, especially if you're a punchier rider, just a little kick, and you'll be straight back on it. They're looking at ESRT, they've only got 5 riders today, and that's going to hurt them. They're about the same as KC, so they've caught up on Eagle Fang. And they might have caught up, and same with KC on some of the teams ahead of them. They're doing very well for 5 riders, and again, they're a very organised team. So it was the Swedish Zwift team, with some of these riders here, who were the World Champion Frappe teams in the latest World Championships. And there was a dirt team disqualified who did very well in that, but one of their riders went over the limit on the climb, and so they were rightly promoted into Espresso, leaving the Swedish Zwifters, who I think they came second. They were comfortably ahead of the next teams as well to take the win. They're a really strong, experienced team, similar to KC, very kind of drilled. They know what they're doing in team time trials, and that can make a huge difference, especially when you have riders. These 5 may not have ridden with each other week in, week out, but most of the Swedish, former Swedish Zwift riders, now ESRT, will probably have ridden a similar style for TTTs in similar teams, and they'll just be used to it. So when they're swapping into a series with this, where there's only one TTT, they'll be very strong and able to just easily adapt and work with each other without much practice. So just drop back, have a look at some more times. We've got Cobra Kai, one of the dirt teams here. I think are down in 8th. Again, it's a bit of a mixed bag. See, on the front there's a lot of variation. You really want that front rider to be as consistent as possible. Like, it's very hard to do, especially on Zwift and with certain trainers, to keep your numbers similar. But again, it's one of the things too, the better teams, if they're pulling and aiming for, say, 5 watts per kilo, they'll be, varying between 4.8, 5.2 for almost the entire time. And they're just consistently hitting those same numbers in the pack. They're going to stay around 3.3 in a Frappe team, 3.4 maybe if they're going really quickly. And they can just hold that number consistently without much issue. And you'll see it's so much smoother. And here they're doing very well in the pack. It's really nice and smooth. But the front pace is just a little bit too varied. And one of the problems is when you do vary your pace up and down, you generally just lose a bit of speed. The smoother you can keep it, the higher your average speed will end up. See here, they're not quite pushing up here. It is 3%, the speeds are dropping below 40 kph, and they're not above 4 watts per kilo. Again, as said earlier, you need to be pushing up these sections at closer to 5. Like, I know people are tired and they're hurting, and it's so easy to say when I'm not doing it, but you need to attack all these climbs because there's so much time to be gained. When we're on the flats, most of these teams will be aiming to hold within 2 kph of each other on the flats. But on the climbs, some of them will be doing 40 up that climb, whereas others are doing 35, and it really adds up quickly. It might only be 100 meters, but that's like doing half a kilometer at just 1 kilometer an hour less on the straights, on the flats. And so much of this course is actually up and down section. We had the start that was flat in the desert, but through these parts it's far more undulating. So just going to drop back, look at Cryogen. So it's, Monta is one of the top individual riders. I'm not sure quite where he is in the individual standings at the moment, but he's been doing very well week in, week out. He's helping these Cryogen teams coming to an overtake on the Cobra Kai. So one thing that's quite interesting, because Zwift haven't actually set up a dedicated TTT mode, which is something they have said they're planning, so it'd be great if we see that sooner rather than later from them. Don't know if Eric Min ever would watch a video like this, but you know, if he is, please focus on it. But what we tend to do, there's a lot of rules that were kind of unspoken, and I think for a lot of the events this is laid out, but when you have an overtake, the team behind should also increase their pace while the team in front decreases it. It shouldn't be a case of you just slowly come through, because then you're going to benefit a lot from the draft, and that kind of defeats the point. What you want is a very clear, quick changeover. Obviously that can be very difficult when you get into things like downhills, where it's actually quite hard to get out of the draft, and teams don't want to suddenly have to, you know, if they're relying on a downhill to get some recovery and they're being told, oh, you need to push really hard to overtake, they're just not going to do it. I think it's unreasonable to expect that. But there's kind of unwritten rules of, you know, what's reasonable and what isn't. So you see Cobra Kai have seemingly pushed off a bit. They had a 3-second gap a while ago, and they've got it up and maintained it at 3 seconds. So it's a bit odd that Cryogen aren't pushing on and trying to catch up. You see they were a bit slow on the front there. Weren't quite holding the numbers they were before. And they are very bunched up. So, you know, it doesn't seem like a very consistent and smooth ride, which is going to cost them time. You see they're 46 seconds down on the right-hand side to SRT, which means they're 14 seconds up overall. But it's, you know, they could be gaining a lot more, especially with what looks to be a fairly full team. And they've got only 6 riders. So, you know, they are down a few. But I'd like to see them, again, pushing up together rather than just lead ride through this incline. So when you're on the inclines, the draft is lessened. You're at a slower speed, so there's less benefit to the draft. So the numbers I talked about earlier were on the flats. When you get into inclines, that percentage saving from the being in the draft does slow significantly, so everyone has to work. See there, everyone's up to 5 in the pack, really pushing hard. And you see, I think they may be planning to make the move right now to get through this dirt team. So what we'd like to see is the dirt riders all dropping down together and the Cryogen riders all moving up together and trying to make a clean pass together. Now that sticky draft has been seemingly fixed, you have a far less issues with these changeovers, but previously it could be an absolute horrific time, because 1 or 2 rides would just get caught suddenly behind these rides who have slowed down, and they'd get stuck and suddenly gaps would open up. So lots of teams, like, it was felt generally that, you know, it was actually not a benefit to be overtaken, even for the split-second increase in draft you had. And so a lot of the reasons things like the Platinum League, well, probably not the reason it came about, one of the benefits of racing the Platinum League on Thursday, TTTs, so a league for the teams who have generally come towards the top from the week before, was that you'd start off in the reverse order of where you were last week, so there's very little, if any, overtaking most weeks, which generally ensures a smoother and fairer kind of, well, fairer set of rides essentially, and more comparable times between each team. So going back to Watt Fabric, having a look, they're down a few riders. Doesn't seem to be any clear lead at the front. You know, it does happen. There are periods where, you know, you get confused, and lots of teams communicate in different ways. Lots of people have used a variety of methods. One of the entertaining things a couple of months ago is that Discord went down just before a TTT. I mean, it was entertaining for some of us who were lucky enough not to be racing quite that time zone. I think it was for the ZRL TTTs, but teams had to last minute suddenly find out a method they could communicate to each other, and lots who just used Discord at that point. I believe it was an AWS issue, so actually it wasn't just Discord, lots of social media and websites were down. But for those who couldn't get in contact with each other, it meant it was an absolutely hectic situation for team time trial, especially trying to organise who was pulling when, what order you were going in, if someone was blowing, if someone couldn't pull anymore. Whereas a lot of top teams will have a very clear method of communication, and it'll be drilled in, you know, one person might DS, essentially just calling out the orders, managing it, and some do that while riding, some have someone who isn't riding looking after it, which I think I regularly do for some of the dirt teams. And that's how they'll manage it and keeping the order. But, you know, it does happen. Sometimes people get confused. They're not sure who's pulling. And again, when you have people at the front doing, you know, below 4, well, I mean, for when you're actually racing below 5 watts per kilo usually, for teams of this level, you know, you're going to slow down, and then you've got to work really hard to get the speed back up. So again, we've got another section here where it's just, come through the S's, it's up and down. It's usually advisable to keep a bit tighter through here, keep nice and bunched up. It just avoids any gaps opening up easily, and it means the person at the front regularly changes over, so as a group you just carry a higher speed. Whereas if you just have one person leading, they hit the draft, especially when they're coming on the downhills, they'll build speed but not as quickly as others will, and you'll lose that advantage. Whereas some people call it the washing machine effect, especially when you're just on a long, predominantly downhill section. The first rider will just end up being kicked towards the back, then the next rider will go, and then the next rider will go, and just keep pushing at the front. And sometimes teams will forcibly, if they get to the back, they'll sprint, hit the front. Another guy will then start to sprint, hit the front again, and just building that group speed and cycling the front really quickly. In terms of efficiency, as long as you can do everything perfectly, you know, you want to have the shortest pulls possible, because as you're coming through, see here maybe with Basti, as he comes through, he's doing 55 kph. It's a bit adjusted because he's on a downhill, but as soon as he hits the front, he slows down. Someone else has come, Schultz has come through again, and then he'll slow down because he's hit the front and into the draft, and Herzl now coming through. And you want to take advantage of that changeover while you're sat in the draft, and then moving through, you'll have a bit more speed, so you want to take advantage of that and keep it short so you're benefiting from that changeover. Whereas when you're actually working hard at the front, you have to work a bit harder for the same speed. And so normally, you want to go short. 30 seconds is generally team's ideal, because the shorter you go, the more unorganised it goes, the harder it is, the more extra effort you might have to waste getting in position, making sure you're in the right position, making sure you're holding second wheel, you're coming through at the right time. And so less than 30 seconds, things tend generally start to fall apart. Though I would like to see a really trained team maybe doing 20-second pulls and seeing how they find it. So I think theoretically, you know, it will be quicker. It will benefit them. Taking a look at the box, managing to hold on to Watt Fabric quite well, about 10 seconds down. But they are being caught by Rhino behind them. They are a strong team, a lot of heavy experienced riders in there, which will benefit them. But I don't know what their comms are like. Lots of them are kind of new to it, and it's great. It is great seeing lots of them together, riding as a kind of South African team, and kind of mixing up the teams a little bit, rather than just super strong, like one super strong dirt team. It's good to see multiple competitive ones, which is kind of what they like to target as a club. You see just a few gaps opening up, and there's just not quite the response early enough. I want to see people, as soon as they see a gap, communicating it and responding. Or if say with Graham there, who I think was moving up a bit, just calling out, you know, I'm in the middle of the pack, the gap's around big, I need to move up, guys behind, can you just push? And it makes all the difference. So here is one of the interesting sections. So, you know, we're on a downhill. Lots of teams switch off and think, oh, you know, it's a downhill, we can relax, you don't need to do as much. See some of the riders here down to 3 watts per kilo or less. On the front, they're at 2.7. But look at the speeds. They're at 44 kph. It's slower than if they're on the flats. Like, you have to treat these dirt sections as uphills. And, you know, this one, it's minus 3%, but they're doing 43 kph. You know, normally that'd be 55, 56. Like, and they're not pushing hard enough. This is one of the sections where teams can make huge time by pushing really hard through this entire dirt section. And in reverse especially, like, it's 3%, but essentially your speeds are like an 8-9% climb. And so there's huge benefits if you can actually really attack it aggressively. And a quick look at the Rhino team. Seem to be doing very nicely and having strong pulls on the front, and they seem relatively organised. You see them nice and tight through here, going hard. Again, it's crazy looking at the strength and depth of this league. Yeah, I'm looking back, and so far back, you know, you've got DZR, a team who always do really well in competitions, really strong, well-drilled team. And, you know, they're starting in last. It's absolutely bonkers to see. Oops, apologies, they're not in last. I got confused by the SRT guy who's dropped off. It's a long way for him to go, but fair credit to them. Keeping on pushing, making sure they get to the finish. We've got ZL Scott, who are notoriously a very strong TTT team. You know, they always do quite well, and they're up there on the Thursday ones regularly, especially in the Frappe division. But they've only got 4 riders today, and I think that's going to very much hurt them. You know, big credits for pushing out, grinding away, but 4 rides, you're not going to be able to compete against teams with 8, no matter how strong you are. So we'll switch back to see how the Goosters are getting on. So it looks like they've lost a rider. So that's going to have hurt them. Coming through the assist for the second time, the last little kick out here. And you want to just see him keep pushing on over this top bit. They've essentially got a 4-second lead over TBR at the moment. But just behind TBR, this BZR team who are absolutely killing it today. Look at them almost all together still. I think They started with 8, so I think they've lost 1 rider. See Chris de Grom. No, I can't see who has dropped off. But I think they have lost 1 rider. They're chasing down one of the TBR guys who appears to be significant off the back, and yeah, he's stopped there. It's a very tough section coming through the S's there. Yeah, it's where you're going to lose some riders. You've got this big kick at the very end as well. If you've let gaps open up through there, you're not going to be catching back on the pace that a group carries through it. You see Bizarre just getting a little stretched out, but you know, they're all still within that 5-6 meter gap. And it's not going to hurt them too badly. Take a look a bit further up, you see 3 meters back there. There's a little bit of a big gap here with this front 3. It's Chris de Grom who's just come through a bit too aggressively and opened up the gap behind him. But, you know, they're all still doing well, and they've instantly slowed up at the front, down to 1-2 watts per kilo. And what's good to see is they're resting. On the downhills, it's so important that you do just rest. We're going into a section just ahead where we're going to have a long extended minus 1% downhill. And it's really interesting seeing the difference of how the teams treat that section. My personal recommendation is that you drop maybe 1-2 kph of your actual target pull. So obviously you'll be going quicker because it's a downhill. But you just drop a bit at the front, and you get significantly extra rest on it, because you are on a downhill. You've just done a really technical section, and you want to kind of use that to recover, because just after that you come into the flats of the tunnels, and then you have a climb out into the desert, and you can make so much more time up on that climb out of the desert. You know, you might say you lose a couple of seconds by resting on that kind of tunnel section and this downhill coming up, but you're going to gain 3, 4, 5 seconds by being fresher on the uphill, where the speeds are drastically different. See, it's 8 seconds down TBR, so Bizarre are going to have this target in their eyes. They're going to be able to see them coming around the corners, and it really does help you push on. You know, they see that gap and they're going to want to close it, and it just gives you that little bit extra motivation, especially when you know you're doing well. You know, you're beating the teams around you. You see they're a minute up on Valhalla, and so they're just going to have that confidence, and especially with extra riders. So when we start to get into the last 5k, especially the last 2 kilometers, teams will start to kind of essentially use riders as heroes, as said earlier. You know, give a 1 big pull, especially if they're struggling and they might not make it to the end, and they can go really aggressively then. For the majority of the race, you know, you're trying to do the pace where you know that all your riders are going to survive. But when you come into that last section, especially when you have extra riders, you know, some teams are very happy, they want to stay together, and that's fine. But when we get into the competitive end of a series like this, it's all about just setting the fastest time, and you set the fastest time by finishing with the minimum number of riders. You know, to a point, maybe you want to stay with the minimum number of riders. For these teams, it's 4. So to a point, you want to stay with 5, just in case there's a technical. If you have 6, 7 riders into that last section, you all want to be going full guns going until you drop that rider, because otherwise you've left stuff on the table. You know, there's no point keeping those extra riders and just conserving a little bit, not going full blast. So we see the Gooses lost another rider, so this is going to be a bit dicey for them. Now TBR are down to, I think, 6 riders. So, you know, oh, just 5 riders. So it looks like they've lost Sam Atkinson, which is going to be a big blow for them. Although on the flats, it's going to be very hard for him, being a very lightweight rider. He has such high watts per kilo. You'd like to have seen and hoped that he would have stuck with it and managed to keep hold of them. It might have been a technical, we don't know. But yeah, so we see Gooses are down to 4, and it really is hurting at that point. My team earlier was in a similar position at this point. My side being dropped by them, and it's horrible. You're getting so little rest, and you've just done a huge section where you're really on your limit, pushing hard, giving everything, and then suddenly you're getting even less rest when things are getting tougher. Like, it's a horrible position to be in, and you just see the gap slowly closing to you, and mentally it's just horrific. And hopefully they should be able to now see BZR catching up, and they know that BZR started a minute behind, so BZR are currently in first place, 20 seconds up on the Gooses. If things stand, Gooses should still be in first, but it's going to be much tighter in the league, with especially in competition for 2nd, 3rd and 4th place. So you see here Clem just getting a lot of rest. You see him down at 2 watts per kilo or below. You know, he's taking full advantage in the pack, really sensible, just getting the rest while he can. And they're about to come into this dirt section, so it's interesting. Let's see what they do in this. See Ollie there kicking quite a bit on the front. And see Clem straight up, 5 watts per kilo. And Paul just not quite doing that. You see the gap is starting to open up a little bit. Like, it's not huge, but it's now up to 5 meters. because Clem pushed hard in that section and Paul didn't quite push that. He just was carrying on holding what he was before. And it's now 7 meters, 10 meters, and he's out the draft. So now Paul's having to work hard to close that gap. He's up to more than what the lead rider's doing. And that's why these sections are so crucial. You know, they're down to 39 kilometers an hour. It's not like the flats. It's an uphill, and they need to treat it as such. We'll see how TBR and BZR deal with it. So TBR have all moved up a little bit. They're not quite at the levels, but you know, they're pushing 3.5 to 4 in the pack, which is higher than what they'd be holding in the flats. And BZR, you can see they're all up there. They're all at the high 3s, some into 4 and 5. And, you know, they're holding their speed just that bit better, taking advantage of these sections to catch up. You see Valhalla still largely together. It's good to see him pushing hard. The pace at the front probably isn't quite what it needs to be competitive with the teams ahead. Probably need to be holding closer to 5 or above. Even for the very heavy riders, you'd like to see him holding close to 5 on their pulls at the front, with those who are a bit lighter holding even higher respectively, especially on the flats when it's much more watts based. You know, it's not necessarily as accurate as real life where it's significantly more watts based. There is a big watt per kilo element, but you should really focus on the wattage that you're pulling at the front, especially on the flats. Doesn't mean it's the same for everyone, but it should be closer. See, there's not quite this defined lead rider here. They're very bunched up, and it is going to hurt them. See how many of them in, you know, 2 riders in 3rd place, if not 4 really. Which means, you know, as a team they're going to be doing maybe 10 watts extra in the pack than what they need to be doing, and it just adds up significantly over the course of a race. You don't feel it initially, and to be honest, most of the time you don't even notice, but by the end you're so much more fatigued, and it really adds up. See, it's good they are pushing in here. All of them are going a bit harder through it, so they are aware of this and are realising, you know, speed's a bit lower, let's make it count. But they don't seem to have this clear lead rider doing high enough. And that's what's kind of opening up this gap to BZR. So go back, you see them closing in. And this is going to be an interesting point in the overtakes. TBR won't want to slow down massively. You know, they're working very hard. They're so close to the end of the race. About 6 kilometers to go, so the finish of the race is 36 kilometers, 36.36. Obviously, it's difficult because we can't see it when we're fan viewing, which makes it a bit hard. You don't quite get the live countdown as they're coming to the line. But the magic number is 36.36 kilometers to the line. So, you know, 6 kilometers out, TBR aren't going to want to slow significantly when BZR come through them. And BZR equally, you know, they're pushing very hard. They're not going to have tons in their tank to attack through. And it's around these times that we see a lot of chaos happening. You regularly end up with a couple of teams crossing the line together because they've caught up in the last, you know, 500 meters, 1 kilometer, and there's just everyone's going all out then. It's kind of all bets are off, no rules racing. And people don't care if they overtake or not, they just want to get the fastest time they can. And they certainly don't have the energy to do a full clear team overtake. So again, as we saw earlier with some of the earlier overtakes, what was nice that the team bunched up first, then moved together. I think that's a big part of it. When you kind of just stay in this really strung out mass, it's very difficult to come through cleanly. I see here we are, BZR are bunching up before they move through together. They just want to keep it nice and tidy and everyone going together for a clean overtake. I see, so that's great from them. Just telling very clearly where we're going to try and overtake. You know, they're not doing it on the flats, they're waiting to the moment where they're going to have the least draft, which is very, very respectable. And big kudos to them. Clear communication is really important. Sometimes you'll find that, especially in Thursday TTTs and on events where people haven't regularly done it, you'll get a couple of riders that drop down from teams. So they'll get dropped by their actual team, and then they'll just join the next team behind. And largely it's because they just don't know. They don't know any better. And lots of people get very angry typing like aggressive messages into chat. And it doesn't really help the situation. Like, very much understand people's frustration. You know, I've been very frustrated myself at times like that. Where, you know, you're desperately trying to make sure you're going as quickly as possible. Then suddenly someone just comes in and interferes and just puts everything off. They might not be doing loads to affect it, but it is off-putting to suddenly see other riders in the midst of your team doing strange things. And so just clear communication in the chat when needed really makes a big difference. I thoroughly recommend. So you see here, TBR have just letting the gap open a bit before they start pushing again, which is the right thing to do. And then just grouping back up together. You know, they are suffering. Everyone's in a bad way. And see how high the heart rates are up. And this is the kind of point, you know, you're 4 kilometers out. You've got this long climbing desert. You want the big, strong members of your team to really step up. If I was in this TBR team, I'd be looking for the likes of Martin Jewell to just really push on here, take a big old pull and help them. But at the moment, it's just opened up. He's just been caught out. You see him trying to close the gap. He's doing the exact right thing, punching hard. But problem is, Parker behind him isn't. He has got the momentum, so it might be fine. It looks like it probably is fine. But it's that point you want both riders to go up together and move together. Otherwise, one rider's going to do loads of work, then the other also has to do loads of work. You see, great from Jewell there, pushing straight through to the front. You know, he's coming through with lots of momentum. He's doing well. Why waste that speed? You know, if he's done that by accident rather than just he's fallen off because he's absolutely blown, then you want to hit the front and maintain that speed, even if it's not your pull. You know, take advantage of that. But again, people didn't have his wheel then. He's opened up a 13-meter gap, and no one jumped on his wheel to hold on. So again, anything he's doing at the front there is just wasted energy. He's not pulling the group along. And it's this point, you know, when people are tired, that errors like this start to crop up, and it just makes it even worse because you're tired. That's why they're happening, and then you're doing stuff that makes you even more tired, and riders having to punch up and down, rather than keeping a nice, consistent, flat rhythm, which is what you're seeing with BZR. All of their pack just so consistently around 3.5 watts per kilo, even on this climb. You know, it's just very smooth, very consistent, and that's why they're winning. They've got one clear rider at the front, second rider doing a little bit less than the front rider, third rider a little bit less, and then the back 3 or 4 even less, and it's just smooth and consistent, and that's what you're after. So the Gooses are still holding off TBR. Obviously BZR are well ahead of them, but they start with a 30-second gap on TBR and now 44, so 14 seconds up. It's a good result for them, especially being down to 4 riders. And you see it's just a little bit fractured. You know, it's all within 5 meters, which is great. You know, they're not crossing each other, but you see they're just gaps opening and closing, opening and closing. The gaps between riders aren't consistent. They're not staying a standard distance. You should see one rider moving through as they're about to take their pull. But at the moment, they're bunching up. They got a bit close. 20 seconds ago, they were quite spread out. And it's just, you really notice with the top teams, everything is just consistent and smooth. And these guys are top riders. They're really good. They're experienced. But, you know, you don't have a great day. You're tired. Communication suddenly isn't perfect. And things like this start to creep in. And that's what costs you first place. Just have a look at some of the other teams coming through this section, see how they're getting on. See, Valhalla a minute down on TBR, so that'll be very close. They started a minute behind them, so that'll be neck and neck coming through the line. See how they do on. Eagle Fang 30 seconds behind them. So, you know, it's all very tight. All these gaps started off at 30 seconds between each team. And you see a couple of the guys who have been dropped. Kurt from the Goosters, Berkmans from BZR, just going away gently. Hopefully they're on there supporting their team, fan viewing their team as well, and giving them instructions. That's something that's very invaluable. When you get dropped, all you can really offer at that point is support for your team, and it makes a big difference having people who are willing to then jump on and kind of communicate for them, help them lead there, or just, you know, cheering them on. See Casey again doing really well, nice and smooth, very clear distances. You know, they've maintained these gaps so consistently through this section over the past few seconds. And, you know, they were doing it earlier when we saw them. So we have the rider moving through. Got a little bit of a gap opening up, but it's probably as they're about to change over. And, you know, I don't know if they're doing this, but what's interesting and one that is a general thing to be aware of is you're about to come through a solo rider. You'll notice your lead rider is going to get a bit more draft, so everyone else has to push on a bit. It's little key points like that that do make a difference. And you see that's the difference between the top teams who notice the things like that and are prepared for it. Okay, so we're going back to the front as Gooses are almost at the line. So you see they're all rising up. We like to see towards this section. Some teams just sprint for the line and it's not really that efficient. You want to see people kind of doing as long, hard effort as they can. You know, the optimum thing, you know, there isn't an optimum thing. Ideally, you'd spend all the extra energy evenly over the entirety of the course. But, you know, if you're going to do it, I'd say about, you know, 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes. A big 2-minute effort from everyone. It's probably the best way to end up finishing the course. Just going freeform, little 10-15 second digs on the front. You can see them pushing through to the front. Not quite sure who that was. So Ollie coming from deep, just a little push. And then you want to see someone else just pushing on. You want to see Alan or Paul or even Clem, just another little kick, just constantly recycling the front. You can see BZR, a couple of riders were into the red, if you see on the right-hand bar. They're probably doing that, just kicking through, repeatedly kicking through the front. Whereas Gooses here, you know, they're doing well, they're doing big numbers, they're starting to sprint for the line now, but they weren't cycling the front enough. See there, we see, you know, a guy from BZR already just coming straight through to the front. And then you want to see the next person moving, just recycling. They've lost one off the back. And see, here we have Bruckert. You know, got to the back, started kicking red numbers. He probably doesn't have the energy at this point to come through again. But he's pushing hard and they are cycling at the front. And, you know, it's why they've done well. And it'll be BZR for the win today. Looking at that, it'll be TBR in third, I believe. Oh, wait, no, Valhalla are catching them. So yeah, Valhalla have taken 5 seconds since we last looked, so it'll probably be Valhalla in third, TBR in fourth today. Now again, it's just they're too consistent, there isn't the changeover at the front. You know, they're all doing 4.5, 5, 6 watts per kilo, but they're not being efficient about it. It should be one rider doing 6 watts per kilo, another at 5, another at 4, then someone at the back pushing through hard at 6 as well to hit the front again. But good credit to them, they didn't have a good start, they're down to 4 riders and they pushed all the way throughout. You know, it's very hard when you lose a lot of rides early on and you've planned to have more, because it kind of all goes out the window. Sometimes in that situation, especially if you lose riders really early onto a technical or they don't actually turn up for whatever real life reason, you know, it's sometimes better to have planned with less. We see Valhalla doing really well. You know, they know they had the gap to the team ahead, so you hope they're really pushing on, trying to catch up, see if they can maintain that gap to TBR and take third place. They've also got Eagle Fang on their tail, who are 10 seconds ahead of them. I think they've kind of accepted this point. They're not quite going all in at this stage, you know. They are hurting. They're going to be pushing as hard as they possibly can. But, you know, we've got one rider here pushing 8 watts per kilo. The rest kind of, I hate to say coasting, because I've been in that position and, you know, you were doing absolute max at 4.5 watts per kilo. But, you know, there's always a bit more you can dig. You just get up, and for that last 5 seconds over the line, 10 seconds, you'll want to see people trying to sprint. See Dave's just going hard here for the Eagle Fang. One thing to be cautious, he's gone at 10 watts per kilo, and if he'd gone at like 8, like some of the riders behind him, he wouldn't have opened this gap. Right now, he's not really drafting anyone, he's not providing any benefit from that. That's what I'm saying earlier, is, you know, you want about 2 minutes. From 2 minutes, you want to be consistently rising up, pushing, and using the draft. If you go too hard, you're just going to go off the front, no one behind's going to benefit from the draft. And that's what it's better to do, this consistent, smooth pace, a bit higher from further out. And then everyone else can benefit. They can do the same. They can keep pushing. And you hold, you know, 5 kilometers an hour quicker for that last 2 kilometers, or 1.5 kilometers, rather than holding 10 kilometers an hour quicker for the last 200 meters. You know, you're going to go a lot quicker doing the longer one. And you can see this is what KC are doing. We've got 1 or 2 riders just resting, the back riders pushing on. And he's pushing on highs coming through, hopefully. But they had 2 riders. Okay, so they are 2 riders just recovering at the back, 1 or 2 pushing at the front. Hopefully we see someone else taking over from Radek soon. Yep. So the rider in second, he's pushing hard, coming through, and then he's eased off. He's got the pace to come through. But just little bursts to increase the speed, not doing too much. See Radek's going again at the front. Clearly Radek's just trying to lead him out, but the riders are doing sensible. They're closing the gap quickly, and then getting recovery in. We've got a 15-second gap over ESRT. So I believe that's ESRT who's closed it, so, you know, ESRT are going to be ahead of them by 15 seconds in the final results. They started off with an extra rider, and they're both experienced teams, so it's interesting to see how they've got on through the different tactics they've used and how they've ridden it. Big credits to all of them. It's so hard riding with so few riders, especially for KC riding with 4. It's a really big performance for them, especially to be competitive. And then riding with 4 and finishing on your own, something like this is credit enough, but to be competitive is a whole nother level. So we see Cryogen coming up. They have lost time to ESRT, which they're going to be disappointed about. There's no two ways about it. When you start with more riders than the team ahead of you and you finish further behind, it's, you know, you can't be happy with that. But, you know, they're pushing hard as a team. They're really working together. All of them are up. But that's also, you know, it's not what you want to see. You want to see a bit clearer structure. It shouldn't be all riders doing 5 watts per kilo if that's what their target is. It should be 1 doing 5 watts per kilo, 1 at 4, 1 at 4, 3.5, then 1 at the back again pushing through. But one thing you have noticed, there just isn't that kind of top level racing experience for the TTTs. There aren't people constantly changing over the front. The numbers were a bit too low for the top teams. And it shows, this is a scratch race series generally. The TTT is just one additional part of it. And it does make it more interesting because you have that variation. See Cobra Kai coming through very quickly there. Big credit and push from them over the line. Might have then lost it. So we'll see if we can catch on with the rest. But it might be a bit of a challenge. There we go. Sorry about that. Hopefully we didn't miss too many teams. So you see on the box teams, so they're down to 4 now. So they have had a few riders drop off. Nicholson's just gone. Working together. Snowy's leading out. He's a very experienced rider from Dirt. Won the World Champions from the Dirty Goats, Season 5. See, they're all going up. They're pushing through, changing over the front. It's a bit late on. You'd hope they'd do it a little bit earlier, but they are. They're cycling at the front. Snowy's done a long pull clearly there, and he's just knackered over the line. But it's really nice to see that variation. We've got Watt Fabricant, and just another strong team. We're down to the 50s in terms of individual places. So probably what, 8th, 9th, 10th in the league. And we've got a team as strong as Watt Fabric there. It's absolutely bonkers. See, there's the Rhino team just coming through. So they were doing very well earlier. And normally a very strong heavyweight team. I'm not sure which position round they started with DZR, so I can't really give you too much information there. I believe Rhino started ahead, which means DZR have caught them. You see DZR really pushing here. You'd like to see if they have the ability to do 8-9. They might have been pushing a little bit harder earlier. But, fair credit to them. Big finish, big strong result for them. And I believe, I'm not sure there are any actual other teams between ZR Scott and the finish now. There's a few individual riders just coming through. BZR, Antoine from the Roosters, the Goosters even, also a Rooster rider. Famous by Zwift Insider, regularly writing about his antics with the Roosters. Having moved up 3 divisions, I believe, in the ZRL. Having been put down back in Season 3, I believe. They got demoted into Div 4. And they've been working their way back up, and then last season were in Div 1 and managed to do well and go into the playoffs and into the playoff finals, I believe, for the EMEA section. We've got ZR Scott with their 4 riders. Pushed really hard. It's a tough race with 4. Especially when you're starting at the back and you've got all these not back markers, riders who have been dropped that you're overtaking constantly. Big credit to them pushing all the way through to the line. You see the heart rate, they're really 180 for anyone. They're pushing really hard, right on the limits. The heart rate's not the best indicator because it does vary so much, but 180 for practically anyone is going to be up there and hard. But you can see this Monroe, he's pushed through, he's at the front, he's gone to the back again, and he's pushing through to the front again. It's what we like to see. That's what we want to see towards the finish of TTTs. Just this washing machine style, just repeated little short bursts on the front. You see just little gaps opening up. They want to be cautious because obviously you do need all 4 over the line. And these little gaps, especially when you're coming into the finish with 4 and pushing hard, it does get dangerous. The last thing you want to do is drop a rider on this section. Especially if they're blowing up or something going wrong. Had a few times, I think it was playoffs of Season 3, where one of the teams, 4 riders, and then just around that little don't want to call it roundabout, the section just behind us, have a look where you can see it going around the pillar, do a little circle around it. One of the riders had a dropout, lost 30 seconds, and it took the team back 3, 4, maybe more places, and it's the worst thing you can watch when there's nothing you can do in the lead group. It doesn't matter how fast you push the line now, your time is based on that 4th rider who's just had a dropout, and so you just sat there waiting and waiting, hoping they can connect quickly, and they have to just do a little individual time trial to the finish. And it's horrific to watch. That's why it's so important that, you know, if you can get 5 to the line, that you try to. Especially in a thing like this, you can try and get as many people signed up and available. But, you know, real life happens. You can't always have that. Sometimes you're going to be down. And, you know, big credit to ZR Scott, because they were down rides. They started with 4, and they pushed hard and finished with 4. Same with KC. It's far important to turn up and put that effort in. And they will benefit from it. Okay, so we'll see if we can quickly get up the results while we're here. Before we just end the stream. It won't be very clear, but I'm just going to quickly change between the stream, the delays, and then the finish positions on ZwiftPower. Yep, so they should be up now. Just get them on the screen for you. So as you can see, the Goosters end up with a 28-second gap over BZR, but BZR started a minute behind. Which means obviously they won by 32 seconds, BZR in first. Then the gap to TBR, so TBR were 30 seconds behind the Goosters. Goosters opened that up to a 22-second gap. 22 seconds. 22-second gap. But you can also see then the Valhalla, so the start order was Dirt, TBR, BZR, Valhalla, which means TBR and Valhalla started off a minute apart. And you can see they finished less than a minute apart on this, so Valhalla will have pipped out TBR. Would have been potentially into third, but Eagle Fang caught up Valhalla as well. So Eagle Fang will take third, Valhalla fourth, and then I believe TBR in fifth. So we'll just quickly go back on the start delay just so you can have a quick look to make it a bit easier for you, because I can't remember all of these. So yeah, ESRT and KC 30 seconds apart, then Cobra Kai behind them. As you see on the finish, ESRT were only 16 seconds behind, so ESRT will have beaten KC, catching them up. And Cryogen, who did better. Okay, so Cryogen did overtake Eagle Fang's team with Darren Manza, Ali, Colin, and Ian. So that's the Eagle Fang team, and then behind them is the Box team. So it looks like Cryogen did have a good performance, taking 30 seconds out of them. And presumably they started a minute behind ESRT, so they've beaten ESRT and Casey as well. See how they are against some of the other teams. So they finished 239 behind the other Dirt team, Eagle Fang, sorry. So that's not that one. 245 behind, and they started 2 minutes behind, so they won't have caught them up. So they'll be the next best are the teams after Eagle Fang, Valhalla, TBR, BZR, and Dirt. So it should be Cryogen 6th, ESRT 7th, Kirchmeier 8th, or close to that. Then what's the other Dirt team? Not Eagle Fang. Forgetting all the names of them now. Sorry, Cobra Kai following them. And then Box and What Fabric. I think What Fabric, we'll just double check whether What Fabric have called up the Box. So, so Box massively overtook What Fabric. So the Box will then be next. We haven't quite got all the results in yet, but I'll probably end it there just for now. So thanks very much for watching this. Next week, we're going to have another scratch race. I'm not sure, I think Zwift has decided to just kind of pause there. So next week we've got another scratch race. It's triple loops, which I believe is London. I'm not actually familiar with it too much. Pretty sure it's a London stage. Yeah, going up Leith Hill and then Box Hill. But it's only the Leith Hill. We have a sprint beforehand in London, which is downhill. It's only fractionally downhill, but it's the normal mall sprint then. And then we've come back out the centre of London, up Leith Hill, which is the one that has a bit of a climb into it. And then the actual time segment, this is our last section, but it's very steep. Most of it's around 8-9%, some of it 10-12%. It averages about, I think the segment's 1.9 kilometres. Well, take a look at it on the screen so you can see properly. Yeah, so it's segment's 1.9 kilometres, 6.8%, and it's worth double points, so that's double first cross line, double FTS. So it's all going to be about that segment next week. Finish points will matter, but, you know, finish points are largely going to be decided on that segment. I imagine the group's going to split up a little bit before it, but that's going to be what it's really about. Those Leith Hill points, especially FTS, is going to be 40 points because it's double points. It's going to be crucial next week. So see if people are specifically targeting that, to just sit in the draft and really focus on that. See people like Sam Atkinson and Anya doing really well again on those. You know, lighter riders who have got a bit of punch about them will really dominate on this part. And we've got a long downhill. See, it'll be interesting with the groups coming back together, what happens. And up Box Hill again. So it's 2 tough climbs. People might have a couple of points for the sprint, but, you know, there's a lot of points on offer up Leith Hill and then into the finish, and that's going to be the decider for the series. So we'll see how things go on with that. Scoosters, I think, took out a little bit of a bigger advantage over TBR. I think that a great performance from Sam Atkinson from TBR probably won't be enough to close that gap to the Goosters in first. I'm not sure about BZR. They've got a couple of strong riders, but generally just a really, really strong team. So if they can get all their riders over in that front group after Leith Hill, and especially going to the finish and pick up a couple of points there, they might do well. But I think at the moment, Goosters are definitely going to be favourites to take the win overall in the B+ division of Zone 2. Okay, so next week we'll be covering B+ again in this, and in Zone 1 we'll be covering the B category, which is 3.2 to 3.5 watts per kilo FTS. Losing track of everything here. Yeah, 3.2 to about 3.5, I believe. Yeah, 60 minute. Okay, well, thanks very much for watching. I'll hopefully see you all next week. Good luck into the final week.